Okay, cool. Well, excited for that. Well, if you still got some time, we're nearing the end of our conversation, but I'd love to get into your 5 favorite Christian albums if you still got time tonight.
I have one request.
Okay.
Permission to cheat a little bit.
Okay. Uh-oh. All right.
So what I came up with was a definite top 4 and then a massive list of contenders for the 5th spot. And so I was thinking that like there were so many albums in like fairly equal contention for that last spot that I figured in the length of time that I could about one album, I could just list off all these honorable mentions. And if I list anything that you
Okay.
would particularly want to discuss, then you can pick my supposed 5th album for me. Otherwise, I
Sure.
can just list these off and then we can move on to the other 4. Does that work for
Okay.
you?
I mean, yeah. The
I'm
rules
sorry.
don't really matter, I guess. So, but we'll I'll allow it. Let's do
Again,
it.
feel free to if one of these sticks out to you, you can force my 5th pick upon me.
Sure, yeah.
Um,
Well, you're also just you know, you're you have a library of Christian music in your head. So, we'll see if I even know some of the ones that you're talking about. I mean, I'm sure having listened to the podcast,
I
I'm
think
sure
you'll know most of
there's some
these.
commonality. Yeah.
I didn't.
All right.
I
Well,
don't think
let's
I
hear it
pulled any
then.
like super obscure ones
Okay.
out, but um, from House of Heroes, The End Is Not the End, or Suburba. From
Okay.
Falling Up, they're self-titled, or Fangs. From May, The Everglow, or Singularity. And at one point in time, maybe also morning, afternoon, evening, but I've got a complex relationship with that one.
Sure, yeah.
From
Same.
DC Talk, not the album you're thinking, but Free at Last. Uh,
Oh, okay. You're the second one on this show to say "Free at Last" over "Jesus Freak."
who was the
uh,
first?
had Rachel from Mixtape Theology. Uh, that was
Ah,
one of her picks.
good honor.
Yeah.
Um, Friend of the show, Benjamin Daniel, Shelter
Mm.
Heart.
Oh, nice.
Um, Failure On by Beloved.
I do not know that one.
Eve by Emery.
Nice.
Um, the both albums by Forever Changed, Chapters and The Need to Feel Alive. Both albums by Joan Zetta, Popularity and Cool to Be Young. A handful of albums by Sarah Groves, but in particular Fireflies and Songs and Floodplain. Uh, uh, any number of albums by Norma Jean, but in particular Meridional and Wrongdoers.
Uh-huh.
From Jars of Clay, Inland, or The Long Fall Back to Earth. Andrew
Nice.
Peterson's Light for the Lost Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Two very weird choices that most Switchfoot fans would hate me for, but Fading West and Oh Gravity.
I know you're a Fading West defender. I know that. I love Oh Gravity. I need to go back to Fading West. That's for sure.
um,
There's some tracks I love on it, but I don't know. It kind of took me aback when it first came out.
yeah, I think not being a longtime Switchfoot fan gives me a fresh perspective on that one. That was probably harder
Oh,
for active fans to swallow
yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
Um, and then my last honorable mentions here are In Motion and Eat Sleep Repeat by Copeland.
Copeland's another band that um I need to get into their music. I can't name a song by them, so I need to give them some time for sure. But I've heard a lot
Well,
of
that
good
is my
things.
ridiculously long
They're just
list.
all the honorable mentions.
Yeah, those are all the albums that I could think of this week that like would be in fair contention for the number 5 spot here.
Well, there's
Um,
a couple of those for
and
sure
honestly,
that are like. I was just gonna say there's a couple in there that are like all time faves for me. Like
oh
the
nice.
Everglow is
Mm-hmm.
definitely like top 5 albums for me. Um, the Long Fall by Jars of Clay used to be I feel like used to be a contender, like up there,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been kind of been leaning more towards Much Afraid like the past couple years or so.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
but I still love Long Fall. Yeah, I don't know, something about Much Afraid
Crazy
that has been.
times.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, my favorite is Tea and Sympathy. Uh there's just something about
Oh,
that album that
yeah.
just resonates with me more like as I've gotten older. But I do love the Long Fall representation because I feel like that's not one of their most popular albums, but it was the first one that I actually really got into by Jars of Clay. So it's kind of like my first love for them, and I still
Mm,
I love the sound of it. I love the
yeah.
80s and kind of like Killer's sort of influence on it. And Inland is also a terrific album. So yeah,
Well, if we're getting to my top 4, I will also say something I left off of my honorable mentions list
just one more.
just now is the fact that these 4 artists all have other albums that are great enough that they could have been the 5th album. Um,
Oh
you know, these
sure.
are all these are all heavy hitters for me. That have
Mm-hmm.
other worthwhile albums that could be listed on other people's top 5s, and also
Sure.
disclosure that 2 of them are not broadly considered Christian bands. Um, but let's go ahead and dive in.
Like I said, I'm pretty loose. I'm pretty loose on the
I'm
definition of what
breaking all the
is
rules.
Christian. Yeah,
uh,
no, go for it.
at number 4, Types and Shadows by Wolves of the Gate.
Oh, okay. I gotta say, I used to be I was a huge Wolves at the Gate fan, and I kind of fell off at some point, not really intentionally. I think it was more also just me as a metal fan. I just kind of changed my styles. So I haven't really. I need to catch up with their discography before. I got to catch up with them for sure.
Yeah.
I was such a huge fan. I met Nick Deddy, one of their vocalists, at a show. Actually, no, this is a. You know what? Talk about the album, and I'll share my Wolves at the Gate story.
No, you're fine. So I discovered them with their sophomore album, 5x5, which I didn't know was called 5x5 for a long time. I called it VXV. Like an
Uh,
um, and that period of time where I was just getting into heavy music a lot more, and it was becoming more of a go-to for me. And probably at this
hmm
time in my life, it is more than ever. At least in different seasons, I think I'm an active fan of more like metalcore, and hardcore right now than I ever have been. But they
hmm
have a really special place in my heart because, for one, I think their music, uh, especially 5x5 and Types and Shadows, just has an emphasis on like the foundational songwriting being just as good as can be, with
hmm
just the tastiest of like metalcore and post hardcore stuff happening on top of that really really solid foundation. But the other reason that Wolves Gate have a just indelibly special place in my heart is that my wife and I met at a Wolves Gate concert.
Oh,
We were both
nice.
there for Wolves Gate. She's also a very big fan. Um, I went up and talked to her, like using. She was wearing a signed Wolves the Gate T-shirt that I used as like the
hmm
um, the opening to the conversation. Um, and so we've been able to see them together now, and um, well, I guess we saw them together with the night we met, but it's
Right.
it's just a very very special band for us. And Types and Shadows in 2016 just really really won me over. And there a lot of great music came out that year. Low
Hmm.
Teens by Every Time I Die, Act 5 by the Deer Hunter, um, other things. But that album really has stood the test of time for me as like an immaculately written and produced album with just some of the best drum fills, super tasteful drum writing that I've ever heard. And I just think everything about it is spectacular. And I think it saves some of the best songs for last and ends with like probably what I would say the two like best songs of their career and two of the best songs in the history of the genre. Um, but yeah, I just adore that thing, like front to back.
That little thing.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was. Yeah. Looking back at their discography. Yeah. I played the heck out of Captors and 5x5. Um, and We Are the Ones, but mostly those other two albums,
Let's see, you fell
like
off right
Dead
before the best one
Man.
came out.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't really even know why. I don't know what was going on in my life at the time, but yeah, I was a big fan. Uh, so my Wolves at the Gate story is my brother had this band, a metal band, and he had asked me to. It wasn't a great band. He had asked me to like play drums, and like I'm not really much of a drummer, really. Like I get by, but I'm definitely not really a metal drummer. Like even to the like I didn't even own my own kit. I just practiced on the church drums, and I got
And the
by.
church drums
So
don't have a double pedal,
yeah,
double kick pedal.
right, yeah. And I never learned double pedal. I always convinced myself, like, I'm more of like an Aaron Gillespie type of drummer. He doesn't use double kick really. It's just kind of just he just rocks out. But somehow he got the well, not really somehow, because it was at a local venue. He got this gig to open up for Wolves at the Gate, and they were coming through town, and so. But the thing was, is that like the couple of shows that I did with them, I basically had to ask to borrow the kit from one of the other bands. And so uh, we asked Wolves at the Gate if I could use their kit for our set, and they were so cool about it. And I played on Wolves at the Gate's kit for that gig, and I felt so bad because like only like 5 people showed up. And I was like, oh man, Wolves at the Gate is like so much better than this. But it was still a fun show. And there's a picture of me and uh wait, is it Nick Getty or Nick Deddy? Am I completely
Deddy.
butchering his name? Deddy, right. Yeah, there's a picture of me and him. This is like almost 10 years ago. Um, but yeah, there's a picture of me and him, and I'm wearing like a For Today shirt. So, um, yeah, so it was a good little memory. That's my Wolves at the Gate story.
That's Wolves at the Great.
Yeah,
Um,
Wolves at the Great. That should be a T-shirt, just like a cheese grater.
um,
All right,
my
so
ne- my number
good,
three.
good pick.
My number three is Stephen Curtis Chapman, The Glorious Unfolding.
Nice, cool.
Um,
That's that's the one um with the I'm looking it up. Oh no, that's the wrong album I'm thinking of.
you might not know this one. This is really a late career album.
Yeah,
2013.
I know the album cover, but I can't say that I'm really all that familiar with this album.
This
Honestly,
is an
I like
album that
Stephen Curtis Chapman.
I like proselytize people with this album. Lifeway had it on like a $5 sale for the longest time. So if anyone had like an event or a birthday, I would just buy them a copy of this. Um, but I I mean, as many great albums as he's released over the years, I personally find this album to be greatest achievement. It is a really like amazing mixture of like the lyrically mature CCM that he mastered in the 90s mixed with like really like well done appropriation of 2010s kind of like acoustic pop, synth pop,
Hmm.
done maturely. Uh, and on top of that, um, his like autobiographical songwriting about mourning and loss and healing and growth. In 2009, he released an also great album called Beauty Will Rise that
Yep.
is way more like lo-fi, like a non-studio album, mostly like acoustic home recordings that
Hmm.
are all the songs he wrote in the immediate aftermath of his daughter dying,
Hmm.
his like adopted daughter dying at a very young age. Um, and him just dealing with the doubt and the loss and the tragedy. Um, so the glorious unfolding is the next chapter in that story, and so it's still dealing with those themes very on the nose and autobiographically, with some songs straight up like naming people in his family and
Hmm.
um but it's placing it back in the context of him making like CCM Christian pop. um
Right.
and so it's like that, but still like moving forward into like trying new things. And um I feel like he, even though it's such like this like modern you know pop sounding album for 2013, it's also like, to me, like he's never channeled Rich Mullins as well as he does on this album. And
Hmm.
just that spirit and that willingness to be honest while still being like spiritually true and profound and faithful to scripture. And um I've just found so much comfort and help and healing in that album over the years, along with it just being excellent in every manner of songwriting, performance, production. Um,
Hmm.
Stephen Chris Chapman himself, like he records so many of the instruments throughout the album. It's insane. Like he poured so much of himself into this album, records so many extra instruments and layers of guitars, and in particular, just loads and loads and loads of background vocals that put my albums to shame. That put most albums to shame. It's just crazy. Um, so love getting a chance to spotlight that one. I think it's easy to overlook most CCM artists, especially one who seems like his, who peaked, in the 90s, according to most people. But
Hmm.
it's truly, even if people don't think it's one of his best albums, I think it's undeniably a late career triumph, and an album that's very
Hmm.
dear to me.
Yeah, I remember I've heard uh what's the term I want? Uh I've heard you be an apologetic for an album before. Uh and it's made me curious for sure cuz um yeah, I grew up with like a lot of the old school Stephen Curtis Chapman and was aware of like a lot of the more stuff he was coming out with, but never really took the time to like really listen to his albums, but I have a I have a huge amount. It's like where Christian music is now. It's like, man, we need more Stephen Curtis Chapmans today. So I
Yeah.
have a huge amount of respect for him, and definitely go back albums. So maybe what I'll do is that I'll someday do a Stephen Curtis Chapman album ranking episode, and that'll
Mm.
get me to do a huge dive
As
into
a
his
big
disc, like
undertaking.
all the stuff that I've missed. I'll
Yeah.
do it. I'll, I'm threatening everyone. Like, I'll do it. I swear. I'll do it. So, but yeah, good pick. Just at least I can't speak for the album, but good.
Well, my number 2 is one that I already mentioned in this episode, so I know that you're not familiar with it. But Major Minor by Thrice,
Okay.
2011. It at the upon release seemed like Thrice only found their groove. Um, Years genre and very extreme levels of experimentation from album to album, and kind of going through their career with a reputation that people never knew what to expect next.
Mhm.
Um, their 2009 album Beggars, which is also a favorite of mine, um, saw them finding such a comfy genre for them. Um, this like just nice melding of like garage rock alternative with a little bit of their like punk and hardcore roots, a little bit of blues, a little bit of
Mhm.
grunge, just all melding really nicely and kind of getting away from the high concept stuff they've been doing and just getting back to being four friends playing in a room together. That worked so well on 2009's Beggars that the move to 2011's Major Minor is the smallest jump stylistically they've ever made between albums. It's very much just them doing Beggars again, but in my
Mhm.
opinion, better. Not
Better,
by a
yeah.
huge margin, but for by enough of a margin to make a big difference for me personally.
Mhm.
But it's also the time where like those two albums saw the singer leaning more into his faith in a way that he hasn't for the rest of Thrice's discography. Um,
Mm.
the way things actually panned out is that like in 2011, I thought this was just going to be like, oh, this is what Thrice is going to do for a while. I'm so stoked that they're just going to be making more albums like Beggars and Major Minor for this phase of their career, and instead they took a
Right.
hiatus because this move towards being more overtly Christian was part of the singer um, kind of developing a passion for worship leading. He was leading at his local church,
Mm.
was a Mars Hill plant in Orange County, California.
Oh.
And he ended up getting roped in to be the lead pastor or the worship pastor of the main Mars Hill Church, led by Mark Driscoll up in Seattle.
How did I not know that?
And
That's
the
that's
crazy
interesting.
story is that the singer of Thrice ended up being one of the main like whistleblowers who called Mark Driscoll out and helped bring the whole thing
Mhm.
down. But with that experience came a pretty heavy dose of disillusionment that now sees him being way more kind of hidden and coy with his Christianity in modern
Sure.
Thrice music post hiatus, and also has seen him kind of sadly move in progressive directions
Mm.
theologically. I don't have any current updates, but last I heard a few years ago, he was into like process theology and the idea that God changes and God learns
Right.
over time, and that um, God has disowned certain things from the Old Testament that he didn't know to be wrong back then, but he knows to be wrong now. It's a really silly cycle of just us projecting our modern philosophies upon God and
Right.
refusing to you know accept God as he is and to properly interpret and contextualize the Old Testament and
Mm-hmm.
allow, you know, God to just be righteous in his own terms. So
Right.
that's kind of been a sad thing that has soured Thrice's career for me, along with their more recent albums legitimately being some of my least favorite things they've done musically.
Oh.
Um,
Mm.
but all that as an aside, like for me, if they had just officially hung up their hats with Major Minor in 2011, I think they would have just ended on the perfect swan song. And at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, so like as I said, would have just been stoked for them to just, you know, buckle in and just keep making albums like Beggars and Major Minor perpetually for as long as they wanted
Right.
to. I really do think this is just like such a amazingly streamlined and focused distillation um, of what they'd proven to be great at over the years, but
Mm-hmm.
without the flashy riffs and without being overly technical and without having some big concept behind it. Just straightforward, amazing songwriting. Um,
Yeah.
and I just adore this album. In a lot of ways, like I actually think like Major Minor's influence on me might be a heavy thing of what comes next for my music. Um,
Okay. Cool.
it wasn't even intentional, but some of the newer songs I've been writing, and I like showed them to the demos to my brother, and he was like, "Oh, so you're making Major Minor now?" I was like, "Oh, I guess I am."
Oops.
um, I was like, we'll see what materializes and how things develop, but
Yeah.
um, there there is a very funny extent to which Beggars, the 2009 album, did weigh very heavily over my first few releases. Like
Mm-hmm.
Beggars was a big reference point for Unfall and um, for the first version of Development and Compromise when I recorded the original 11 songs. So it keeps coming back as like an important reference point for these first three albums. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so if Thrice followed Beggars with Major Minor, then it makes sense that I would follow all of my Beggars albums with some Major Minor stuff. So again, we'll see, but
Right.
that's kind of the where the trajectory seems to be headed.
Okay.
And I just think it's like it's a lot of people say it's over compressed, and I think I just like that. Like for me, this is
Mm-hmm.
like kind of what I wish all rock music sounded like, and audiophiles
Sure.
out there
Yeah.
are not a fan, but it's totally what.
It's all subjective.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that.
Art is subjective. Yeah. I can't speak much for that. I do need to listen to more Thrice. Like I said, I only know Black Honey and I really like that song. Uh so I feel like I would like them. And that is sad to know about the lead singer and the whole Mars Hill thing. Like we don't have to like dwell on this for long, but like it's kind of crazy how that whole situation like it affected a lot of artists actually because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of artists were very involved in it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know like the guys, I'm pretty sure the guys at Emory were involved in Mars Hill, uh, King's Kaleidoscope, I think. But
Yeah, so I
one
think
for
some of the guys
sure.
from Emory might have just like attended churches up there or like new people.
Okay,
Because they're
okay,
they were Seattle based. They moved up to Seattle because that's where Tooth and Nail is. So
mm-hmm.
like any Tooth and Nail band or like Tooth and Nail employee could have had potential crossover, just
Sure,
location
yeah,
wise, and because like Mars Hill had like Seattle is already like one of the least Christian places in the country. So a place that is statistically not very Christian, but you have a bunch
mm-hmm.
of like Christian bands and a big Christian label, and a lot of the biggest Christian churches in Seattle are like satellites or plants of Mars Hill. And so yeah, like
Yeah,
the percentage likelihood that believers up there are somehow connected to that circle of churches,
yeah,
and then all of it collapses because one narcissistic leader just
Yeah.
was going for too much control, too much, um, you know, popularity and financial gain, and
Mm-hmm.
had managed to surround himself with yes men who weren't keeping him accountable. It's and yeah,
Yeah.
like the Bible tells us that um, teachers and leaders will be held accountable for how they lead, and he had amassed Driscoll had amassed such following that like you can see just how strong his influence over people was by how much fallout there was around his failure and his unwillingness to properly repent and make things right.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so like
Yeah.
there's
It's
a
sad.
handful of bands that were Mars Hill bands, like they were the band of the church. So
Mm-hmm.
the big ones were Citizens, King's Kaleidoscope, and Ghost Ship, along with Dustin's
Right.
project, the Modern Post. And yeah, they've kind of all spread out in different directions and have had
Mm-hmm.
different wrestlings with theology. And um, I think Ghost Ship might be the only one that's really like stayed and just like, yeah, we're just gonna keep making pretty worshipful music. Well, I guess Citizens eventually found themselves back to making basically worship music on their more recent stuff, but there
Yeah,
was a
they went
period
on a
there with like their
journey
album
for
Fear
sure.
where it seemed like they weren't gonna make worship music at all.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, and the same thing happened with one of my yeah, same thing happened with one of my favorite artists, Levi the Poet, and I didn't even realize that he was with Mars Hill until I watched his recent documentary and how that all went down, and now it's like I don't even know like what he believes anymore. It's just kind of like all over the place, but it's just sad that something like that can just cause so many people to fall astray. But you know, anyways, on that note, what's your number two, Chase?
Oh no, we're on to number one because I only had four.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Remember, and
Okay, my bad. I can't
if
count.
if you know this one, I would actually be shocked. So
Okay,
I'm gonna go ahead and
I accept
apologize
the
for
challenge.
the high likelihood that I've managed to pick all favorite albums that you aren't really familiar with. Um,
It's okay. You're
but
just more of a hipster than me.
my number one is not a Christian band, but if you dive into the lyrics of this one, undeniably a Christian album. The
Okay.
Earth Sings Me Fa Me by The Receiving End of Sirens.
Yep. Nope. Don't know them.
um,
But do tell me. Tell me about it.
so you might re- recall, I don't know if how long you've been listening to the JFH podcast, but an episode that we made recently, I think this past summer, was the tragedy of two album bands with John Mark
Oh yeah.
Amos,
Yeah.
formerly of Atlas, who they themselves would be considered a two album band. Um,
Hmm.
and there's just so many artists, Christian and non, that I love that only ever put two albums out. My American Heart, Forever Changed, Jonesetta, and another one of those is The Receiving End of Sirens. They made um, a debut called Between the Heart and the Snaps that made a really gigantic splash and was extremely influential across the scene. My kind of like anecdotal evidence for that is I used to subscribe to Alternative Press, the magazine,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, back in these days, Alt Press, one of their monthly columns was this A&R um, spot where they would show a bunch of local bands that had kind of written in and they like showing their favorite music from these unsigned artists. And with each write up of these local bands, um, there would be like a read if you like or kind of sounds like influenced by. And I swear for years, this section always had at least one band where the receiving end of Sirens was listed as like a sound-alike or uh, an influence. One of the big
Okay.
reasons why is that they like there were some other artists like Emery doing this of having multiple vocalists who would sing over each other, um,
Mm-hmm.
and have like interwoven melodies and be like singing different lyrics at the same time. Um, and like Emery did it sometimes, and other bands have done it, but
Yeah.
like the Receiving End of Sirens did something really special with how creatively they did it and how they did it with three vocalists, um, and having actual parts where like three different sets of lyrics with three different melodies could happen at the same time and it was intelligible. um, and just
Right.
extremely well crafted, um, prog-ish post-hardcore, that was like the most artsy mature thing you could ever imagine playing on like a Warped Tour type stage. um
Mm-hmm.
just a really like ahead of their time band that basically completely flopped on the second album and lost
Mm.
a lot of interest with, um a huge chunk of their fan base, some of whom to this day don't really care about the second album and only care about the first. And the
Mm-hmm.
second album is the one I'm talking about today. I'm one of the defenders that the second album is
Oh,
actually the
okay.
better of the two. I think they're both masterpieces, um, but the second album for me really just is, I think, is one of the greatest concept albums of all time. It is this kind of dual themed album about, um,
Mm-hmm.
the the emptiness of space and, um, about generational sin of
Mm.
like a deadbeat dad having, a terrible relationship with his son, who then grows up and has a daughter and is seeing himself become his dad, and trying not to have the same terrible relationship with his daughter, and trying to fight off like the demons of his family's struggles. And um it was really really thoughtful stuff, um that is well versed in scripture and well versed in C.S. Lewis and well versed in like cultural references and movies, and just brings all these things to bear on an album that I think is just musically just so creative and inventive and adventurous. Um, and these songs that are just
Mm.
so intricately layered and so thoughtfully composed. It's just something that, like, granted, like as time goes on and production improves, there are times, this album's from 2006, I think. I get confused, might be 2007.
Mm-hmm.
um but like there's an extent to which this album doesn't sound great anymore, especially on some speakers. But if
Sure.
you have the right headphones on, this is just the type of thing you can just still just get utterly lost in. Like the soundscapes
Sure.
match the kind of space elements of it so well. And then the album even like uses kind of like space and silence as an instrument, and sometimes has these just
Mm-hmm.
like gaps of just like almost nothing happening. um that is just, it's just really really artfully done, but always has its hands on, like this finger on the pulse of this like fighting against spiritual death and trying to keep like whatever faith you have alive, just
Mm-hmm.
everything, like all the evil of the world around us. um and it's, I feel like it's an album that like so successfully taps into my own spiritual psyche and experience and struggles and whatnot. That over the years, I've repeatedly said that, like, if you want to get to know me better as a person, you can spend time with this album. Um,
Hmm.
and I just think it's a deep, deep tragedy that this band broke up and never made anything
Hmm.
again. And one of my like biggest like losses of the pandemic is that they finally were gonna have a reunion tour in like May and June of 2020
Uh,
and had to like forever cancel it. Because it was just so hard for them to put
oh,
together and to
jeez.
get all the members. Um, and they're like, right, same place at the same time. And so they're pretty sure that they'll never be able to make that happen again. Um, but I had my tickets
Oh man.
for it, and
Well,
it's slightly devastating. Um, but I got to see them live a handful of times back in the day, and they were
yeah.
amazing back then. And like
Oh, okay. So
I feel like I'm
you have seen
always
them live.
striving. Yeah, back in 2005 through 2008, got to see them a handful of times. Um,
Okay.
and I think I'm always striving for what they were able to achieve structurally and dynamically and just
Mm-hmm.
like creative, inventively. Um, I do think their first album is a better entry point for most people. Um, but for someone willing to like spend the time with it, The Earth Sings Me On Me is um, a really, really gratifying album to dive into. And
Nice.
along with
Well, you
like again,
definitely.
it's kind of a stretch to call it a Christian, but I legitimately
Yeah.
can consider it my second favorite album of all time.
Well, I mean, well, if it's tooth and nail, that means it's Christian, right?
It's not tooth and nail,
Oh, I thought you said it was
but
tooth and nail. Sorry.
no, that is a good joke though.
Okay.
That is the assumption everyone
It
makes
would have
about every tooth
worked.
and nail. Yeah,
Yeah.
now, they were on a
Uh,
Triple Crown.
okay. Well, I mean, yeah, you have those bands where um like the whole band may not be Christian, but like the lead singer definitely is and like
Right.
explores a lot of those concepts. Like for me, you know, that would be that band would be like Mumford and I don't know if the whole band is Christian, but Marcus Mumford definitely um explores a lot of those ideas of his faith and such. So so those those get a pass, I'd say. But that's cool. You definitely sold me. I definitely want to check it out. I'll want to check both of those albums out because I am not familiar, but it sounds like something that I could like, you know. So I'll definitely be checking it out. What's what's your number one favorite like all time?
The May by Barry Manilow.
that's that's a joke, right?
Mm,
Or is it actually?
mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Interesting.
if The Earth Sings Me For Me is one of the greatest concept albums of all time, I think Barry Manilow made the greatest concept album of all time, which seems like such a goofy thing to say. This is another late career
Okay, I'm
triumph, which I just think I'm a big fan of late career music. Um,
I guess
I
so,
do
yeah.
think like his early stuff is great and his hits are amazing and he has a lot of great deep cuts and lesser known albums as well. I'm
Mhm.
obviously biased in his favor because I was raised on his music. Like his, radio hits were favorites of my mom, and so I grew up loving a lot of his big songs. Mandy and
Mhm.
Can't Smile Without You, Even Now, Copacabana, like all that stuff. But here at the Mayflower is when he transitioned from being my mom's artist to being my artist. It was an album he released in 2001,
Mm.
So as becoming a music fan, um, and it's this song, or sorry, it's this album where every single song is sung from the perspective of people who live at this historic Mayflower hotel in New York City, and just exploring the types of people who would live there. And sometimes like you have people like meeting in songs on later in the album who were like introduced earlier on the album, or like
Mm.
getting like kind of almost like sequel songs, like get a song from a guy,
Yeah.
like at track 5, and then he comes back at track 15. um and so it's all these like intersecting stories and themes, um and really just amazingly crafted lyrics. Granted, Barry didn't write most of the lyrics. He wrote, most of the album was written with a guy named Enoch Anderson. Um, but
Hmm.
musically, Barry wrote all the music. And it's basically like after this like long storied career of doing all these different genres, from like pop and jazz and disco and like Broadway theater type stuff, like all of that just gets honed into perfection of like an amazing like Boz Scaggs song, like an amazing um you know like smoky jazz house ballad, amazing Latin song, salsa
Yeah.
song, flamenco song. It just does like everything his career has ever done gets brought back like perfectly on this album, to an extent where it's just like
Okay.
16 tracks that just like masterfully display all of these different like styles of
Mm-hmm.
kind of pop and vocal music, with all these intersecting stories that bring them together. And I just adore every single second of it. I just think it's a genuine like
That's
masterpiece.
that's great. I'm so sorry for laughing. Like the reason
No,
I
it's
mean
fine.
the reason why I laughed.
I expect it.
Well, here's the thing: is that like one, I actually don't outside of his hits, I don't know much about Barry Manilow. He does kind of have this like reputation of being like kind of tacked on to like adult contemporary. So I really don't know much about him outside of that and like the few hits that I've heard. So uh that's great. And I'm not even one to laugh because like I'm the guy that likes Mumford and Sons, Newsboys, Phil Collins, all artists that have their fair share amount of criticism and mockery, from general audiences. So but I mean, you've definitely interested me. I mean, I think there is something to say about some certain artists and their like late late career albums. I mean, like one of my favorite albums of all time is Black Star by David Bowie. Like that album is a masterpiece in my opinion. So I don't know, I'll have to check out
Mhm.
some Barry Manilow for sure. Cool. Well,
Oh man, and my fun
anyways,
fact about that
with
album,
that being
I was gonna say real quick that I
sure, yeah.
like finally found a copy and like a used one in like a resale store. And it was a special copy that has 2 bonus tracks on it that like I've never tracked down on the internet before. Like normally like bonus
Oh,
tracks are
nice.
like available on YouTube, but I think this album is not popular enough, plus leans towards such an older audience, that like no one who has the bonus tracks would like know to put them online. So
Hmm.
like it's one of my like most played CDs because um only my CD has access to these 2 other bonus tracks that I love that you can't find streaming or YouTube anywhere.
That's awesome. Yeah. Got a little exclusive there. Cool. Well, hello there. Thanks so much for watching this video. It means a lot. Not sure if you noticed, but this is actually a clip from a longer full-length episode that you can go check out right now on my main channel, I'm Clifford today, because this channel is just a clips and highlights channel. Because if you're not a real YouTuber unless you have multiple channels. So, anyways, go like and subscribe and all that stuff. I love you.